And there we go. All right, thank you.
Great. Amna, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, sure. Sorry. I wasn't, it's the Zoom thing. I'm getting used to it. So a couple of just little Zoom logistics, I think, to help make this training better for us. I think the technical elements do matter when we are all in different spaces. So ideally, if anybody is able to come on to video, I understand that you may not be able to, and you may need to keep yourself muted if you have background noise, but if you are able to, that would really help us make sure that you're engaged and give you the ability to ask us questions in the time that we have, because we've only got just under 40 minutes now to do quite a bit of work today. And what I really recommend, in the top right-hand corner of the screen is a gallery view. So for discussion purposes, I think the gallery view is super helpful. So just a very kind of quick logistical point from me there, from us. And yes, so as Melanie has mentioned, I and Jess are both mid-career master's students at the Kennedy School. And we're both British, so we've really gravitated towards each other and to certain kinds of work, including this work on public narrative, which is quite exciting. And just, of course, to be very clear, as Melanie has already mentioned, this is not our framework. This is the framework of Marshall Ganz and an organization called the LCN, which we will provide you with further resources so that you can share them with others within your organization to help with your organizing. So that's just a little, from before I came to the US for this graduate degree, I was in the UK, and I ran for office on a couple of occasions, and see myself as a sort of social liberal. So not a socialist, but a social liberal. So it's a different sort of, but I'm very, very interested in political issues and very interested in the concept of organizing.
Great. So we will go around and ask you all to introduce yourselves and say a little bit about who you are, and hopefully why you've joined this session as well, and what you're hoping to get out of the next 40 minutes or so. So just for a little bit of background on me, so as Amna said, clearly both British. I've spent my career in public policy in the UK, working on campaigns on a whole ton of things, from health and elderly care through to how we can build more cooperative ownership in the British economy, and have a kind of background in Labour politics as well, so kind of democratic socialism. So coming here and seeing the kind of Bernie train was kind of really interesting to watch from my perspective. And just on Marshall's framework, have found it hugely helpful, and actually came across it a couple of years ago. I saw someone who was trying to build a kind of social movement give a speech around this framework. I had no idea what it was, but it just felt like such a call to action. And then later found out it was Marshall's framework. And so I found it incredibly powerful when I've seen people use this. And I hope it would be a useful tool for you guys as you start to bring more people into the work that you're trying to do. Cool. Salma, do you want to say a quick hello bit about you and what we can hopefully do over the next 40 minutes that would be useful to you?
Sure. Hi, I'm Salma. I'm a first-year student in the history department at UCSB, and I, in the past, have been involved with leftist and socialist parties and movements in Egypt, and feminist movements as well. And I'm from Egypt, obviously. and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm really looking forward to this training. I think I'm not sure I know exactly what to expect, but I think I am interested in messaging, political messaging, and public-facing strategies. And so I think this is what broadly I think I could learn from this training. Thank you.
Cool, thanks. Altana, are you somewhere where you can speak?
Are you talking to me?
Yeah, you were able to just kind of introduce yourself a little bit. I wasn't sure if you were able to take yourself off mute.
Oh yeah. Hi, my name is Itana Parker. I'm at UC Santa Cruz. I'm an undergrad, and I'm an undergrad, just trying to live, I guess. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, awesome. Cool. Melanie, Jeff, do you guys just want to say a quick hello? You're good.
I am Jeff. I'm a PhD student in political science, and I have generally interested in environmental justice, social movements, queer liberation type of social movements. And I think a lot of my background has been in sort of like environmental justice type of scholar activism and an engagement with issues ranging from mountaintop removal, wanting to do research that I think looks at the impacts of mountaintop removal, and really wanting to build and support Appalachian social movements. And I think that has kind of transitioned more so these days to thinking about fair and just transitions and things like the Green New Deal and working with local organizations to imagine what a local Green New Deal would look like, and if it can have a more radical vision than the federal Green New Deal framework. And so I'm excited to learn more about the public narrative framework and to see how I can apply it to different issues, and if there is anything necessary in terms of like applying it to various issue contexts. But thank you so much for doing this training.
Yeah, my name is Melanie. I'm a third year sociology PhD at UCSB. I use they and she pronouns. My activist work and my research for many years have been about transformative justice, so alternatives to policing and imprisonment and punitive systems in general, particularly for sexual violence and intimate partner violence. And when I was on campus last year, I was doing a lot of union organizing, also with Jess, with other folks. I'm very heartened to see the strike that kind of sparked off at Aitana's campus at Santa Cruz and has spread. And yeah, I feel like storytelling and narrative are really important. I've done work on sexual violence for a long time, and I think there it's always clear how much telling one's own story can be a form of healing and liberation. So I'm just excited to see what we bring. I'm also really excited, Salma, to have you and like your experiences. I was going to say, like, I was going to be like, oh, you should offer a teach-in on Egypt and Egyptian politics. And, Aitana, I'm really also glad to have undergrads in the room. I feel like we're often missing that perspective. So yeah.
Awesome, cool. Should we dive a little bit into the framework? Amna, shall I hand over to you?
Great. So I am just about to share the screen. So bear with me on that. Here we go. Cool. All right, let me present this. I'm now sounding like all our professors. How does that look? Does that look fine? Can you see it? Should say today's agenda. Yeah, great. All right, so we've just already kind of covered this, but we were very keen on your expectations as well as ours, because we're just very aware that this framework usually takes like a semester to teach, right? So we are in a short amount of time going to give you an overview and hopefully the tools that you can, but it will take a bit of time and practice from you after this session to go and do that. But we're very, very happy to, I think both, but I don't want to give away Jess's time, but I'm also happy to answer questions that you might have. We've got a list of resources, as you'll see, just before the end as well, and we'll share this with you, so you don't have to worry about taking too many notes. Cool. And then we've got the story of self, and it's interesting, Melanie, that you mentioned it, because that's the area that we're going to try and focus on today to kind of set you off on this journey of pulling a public narrative together because of the three elements that it has: linking and then coaching. Sorry. Hang on. Sorry. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so let me just kick you off on the public narrative framework. A few of you have already mentioned that you have come across it. Perhaps you've come across it in different elements. Marshall Ganz, of course, is kind of infamous, I think, in some ways, when you think about the 1960s and 70s and particularly in California, and his kind of involvement there, but also within the civil rights movement. So very interesting background. But I think what is wonderful about the public narrative framework is sort of, it's in a way embedded social mission, in my opinion. It is not just about telling your own story, but it has a purpose. And I think that's what's fascinating about it, because it is actually a very reflective process. This framework that you can see in front of you starts with the story of self. And of course, that involves a very reflective piece. But as you can see, it also links to purpose. And it links to that story and the community, story of us, the story of now. So there are these three parts, and they do, when you are creating a public narrative, and one thing I will say to you, because sometimes it can help to think about what it actually physically looks like, a public narrative that would come out of this framework would be, say, a 4-minute written or oral speech. But the idea is that you would deliver it. You are delivering this to people because most likely you are trying to call people to action and organize them. But it is something written. You are writing something that is going to motivate others to join you in action on behalf of a shared purpose. So that is what we're really aiming for. So for me, for example, when I first started looking at it, one of my own concerns was that it felt very felt a bit selfish, right? Like, we're sort of we're interested in social impact, we're interested in how people work, we're interested in motivating other people. But actually, one of my real learnings about this framework was, if I want to do that, I need to really understand where my purpose and my own interest in these areas come from. And that's what we will look at a little bit later in the story of self. The story of us is, I think, sometimes the one that is, particularly from the background that you've told me about, going to be a little bit easier for some of us, because actually we have spent perhaps a long time thinking about what us really means. Who is that community that you're trying to speak to? Who is that community that you're trying to motivate? And that urgency part, as you can see in the diagram linking up to the story of now, why do it now? Why should I care about this? What is it that's important today as opposed to in 2 years' time? As we know, we're in a funny moment at the moment with COVID-19, in that we actually can probably hold people's interest for slightly longer than we're normally able to. But at some point, there will be a new world and a new life that looks like the old one. And we will still, the time that people have to act on anything is limited. People have a lot of interest. So this public narrative, the story of self, linking to the story of us and the story of now, will help create a place where you can motivate others to join you in action. So I find this a really fascinating framework, because I think it links together what a lot of people who are interested in social impact and social justice can sort of feel instinctively, that community is really important, that your purpose is really important, and you've got to do it now. But actually, what's really interesting about this framework is bringing this together with this kind of overarching perspective about how it starts with you relate to us, and you need to do it now. And what I think very interesting, we'll come on to this a little bit later, is how the now is extremely tangible, which is something I found quite fascinating and quite hard to do, actually. Like, why do this right now? Like, what can I physically do today to take action on this thing that is somehow linked to you and to this community? And the other thing, I think I've sort of referenced this already, is that this is a process. So you'll have a public narrative, right? But you'll have to revisit it. Perhaps you stop being an undergrad, perhaps your PhD ends, perhaps your interests shift slightly. That's when your public narrative process aspect comes in. It's not just a script that you write once and you push it away in a drawer. It has to be current. And that's the final element, is about reflection and listening. That's a really critical part of this. Any questions on that? We're going to dive into the three elements and some questions that might spark thoughts next. But if you have any questions right now, just shout. Okay. Your silence tells me that I'm doing absolutely everything right, so that's good news. So here's the story of self. The story of self, as we looked at in the previous slide, is your starting point. It's where you begin. It isn't the whole thing, and it is a reflective and listening process, and actually a deeper process than you might think. And this is the part that I found really fascinating about this. It ended up being, you know, I had people saying, but why do you think that? I'm interested in, you know, ending violence against women, but why? Why does that resonate with me? What is it? Why is that interesting? And my instinct was to go really intellectual with it. Oh, it's because of the numbers or the this and that. No, like, what is it about me and my experience? And I think it was mentioned earlier, Melanie, I think you said the power of storytelling. And this is where the power of storytelling, and it's in this part of the three-part framework where your story is very important. So here are some sparking questions, and we'll put these back up later. Why were you called to do what you hope to do in the world? When did you start to care? Why did it matter to you? Can you share a personal story that will enable others to get you? I would also say this is a tough process. So if you can't get it just like that, it's fine, because it takes a while. I'm just aware of the time, so I'm just going to click through to the next slide. Sorry, 1 second. Whoops. Oh my goodness. I'm sorry. I'm doing a professor. Here you go. Right, here we go. Story of us. That's the next part. You've done your story of now. Say, pretend it's done. Now, why does this matter? What's the community element of this? How would you answer this? To what values, experience, or aspirations shared by your colleagues will you appeal when you call on them to join you in action? This actually, I think, is inherently about your audience, and it's very interesting because it helps you understand whether you understand your audience. Story of now. This is harder than you might think, because it's not okay to just say, because it's really important, because I care about it. You've got to outline a vision of successful action, and you've got to outline an urgent challenge that people that you have appealed to in the us can actually take. It's tough. This, I think, was surprisingly the hardest part of it, because every time somebody said, oh, okay, well, what you could do today is, say we go back a few months, phone bank for Elizabeth Warren. It was like, but when? How? What day? When are you actually going to do it? What action do you want somebody to take? How do you get them to commit? So it's taking some of these big concepts that we're talking about and making them into quite specific community and action orientated goals, which I quite like. I like that it takes this idea and this framework and makes it like, sign a petition now. Meet me in room X next week. Don't meet me, social distancing, but you get the point. Here is, to help make it a bit more concrete, a quick video of Marshall Ganz, which we felt was really important to help you understand concretely what a story and a public narrative looks like.
The work of African-American organizers in Mississippi, the most racist.
Sorry, let me just start that again.
The first time I asked myself these questions seriously was in 1964, when I'd finished my third year here at Harvard and volunteered for the Mississippi Summer Project. And the Mississippi Summer Project was an effort to support the work of African-American organizers in Mississippi, the most racist state in the country at the time, and in challenging the barriers of segregation, political rights, and so forth. But organizers Black organizers in Mississippi found they'd either wind up beaten or in jail or worse. And so the idea was to try to bring people who the law did cover to Mississippi in the hope of bringing the law to Mississippi. And so that's why many of us from the North were recruited to go and join in this effort. And we were in a training session in Oxford, Ohio, about 300 of us the night before it was time to go. And we got word that 3 of our party had disappeared, Michael Schwerner, Andy Goodman, and James Chaney. They had gone down a week before, went to Meridian, Mississippi, been sent to Philadelphia, Mississippi to investigate the burning of a Black church where civil rights activity had been going on, and they hadn't been heard from since. Now, Bob Moses, appropriately named, who was the lead organizer of the whole effort, called us together in an auditorium like this. And he was a soft-spoken guy, and he's delivered this news. He says that, you know, our three brothers have disappeared. We don't know what happened, but we think we do know what happened. We think they're gone. And sure enough, 2 months later, their bullet-riddled, beaten bodies were found buried in a dirt levee where the Ku Klux Klan had taken them after the sheriffs turned them over to them. Now, we didn't know that at the time. But Bob said, look, I can't take whole responsibility for this. I would like to tell you just go home, forget it. But I need you to go. And so everybody here's got to decide. You decide not to go, that's fine, that's no shame. But I need you to go. Well, that's one of those moments that you sink into your seat, and it was utter silence in that room. And you begin to think, what the hell am I doing here? Is this what I've, you know, angled for? No. So I began to reflect my own experience. My father was a rabbi. We lived in Germany for 3 years after the Second World War. And as a child, I met people whose lives had been shattered by the horror of the Holocaust, trying to find hope somewhere. But my parents interpreted it to me as not being simply about anti-Semitism, but about racism, and that racism kills. You turn people into objects, anything can happen. Anything you can do it, anything. As a rabbi's kid, I don't know if there's any preacher's kids here or whatever. Oh, there's one. What kind? What kind of protestant? Huh? Of what denomination? Episcopal. All right, good. Yeah, thank you. No, we got it. You have to go to all the stuff. You know, you have to show up at all the things, you know, the services and all that. You're also supposed to be perfect, which is a different set of issues that we're not going to get into right now. But I love the Passover Seder's. I love the telling of the story of the Exodus with food, which was cool. But they would point to the kids and say, you were slaves in Egypt. I say, excuse me, I've never been to Egypt. I've never been a slave. It took a while for me to figure out that what that meant was that that story is not the property of one people, time, or place, but is told generation after generation. And you kind of have to figure out, are you with those guys with the chariots and the horses, or are you with those people who are trying to find their way to a land of promise? The civil rights movement told the same story, literally the same story about the Exodus struggle in Dr. King's account. And finally, it was a movement of young people looking around the room that I was sitting in. I mean, I was 20 at the time. People were 18, 19, 21. It was a movement of young people. And Walter Brueggemann, the Protestant theologian, wrote a book where he said, prophetic imagination or transformational vision occurs at the intersection of two elements. One he calls criticality, which is a clear vision of the world's hurt, of its need, of its pain, coupled, he says, with hope, a sense of the world's promise and possibility. And young people come of age with a critical eye on the world they find and almost of necessity hopeful hearts. And so for many of us, that's what drew us to the civil rights movement. So as we're sitting there in the room, a young woman named Jean Wheeler stood up in the back and she began to say, they say that freedom is a constant struggle. They say freedom is a constant struggle. Oh Lord, we struggled so long, we must be free. They say that freedom is a constant dying. We've died too long, we must be free. And as she stood up and began to walk out of the room, everyone filed in behind her. And the next day, everyone went to Mississippi. Now, that was a life-changing moment for me, because encountering Mississippi was to, with all due respect to Harvard, where my education about race, power, and politics began in America. And it was very clear that the inequalities were so clear, but it was also clear that bringing a few medical supplies or books wouldn't change very much. That's when we began to learn the difference between charity and justice. Charity says, what's wrong? Let me help. Justice says, why is it happening? Let me change it. And when you begin to ask those questions, you make people uncomfortable because you.
So I'm stopping the sharing just there for a moment, because I feel that's a good amount of video time and a good opportunity for us to maybe kick off our discussion around what people saw in that video, and then I'll hand over to Jess to maybe kick off a discussion around story of self. So what did people see? If you think back to our framework, what elements did you see or maybe not see? What surprised you?
Well, I noticed he was following the framework, his own framework, but like when he was talking about the story of himself, he like really emphasized the point that he had a choice. And I think that's a lot of when we do self-reflection, we usually like, or at least me, I statements, I usually like skip over that, like I had a choice and I just do it, you know. I don't really go through that process and thinking through it with an audience that I had a choice to make and I had to weigh all the values and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's really powerful and a great point, Aitana. I think he does that brilliantly. He takes you on the journey, and yeah.
Just to build on what you said, I think there's something, a real lesson as well that I picked up when I saw Marshall speak, which is this sense of, I think most people when they come into working on a cause that they care about, they see people who are real advocates and activists, and they think there's something inherently different about the way that they got into this work. And actually what I think Marshall does, and the people who use his framework really well, is, as you said, you know, they demonstrate that there's a choice, but they also, you know, they paint the picture of, it could have been, you know, pretty easy for him just to go home, go back to university, all would have been really nice, his mum would have been proud, he could have graduated. But actually he made an active choice, and he almost invites all of us to do the same thing on whatever we're working on. So for me, that's always a really powerful kind of moment in that narrative.
And I think also like giving very specific examples of what exactly in his story was personal and was related to activism. Like it's easy to say I was always interested in that, or I always read about this, but I think like starting with when I was in Mississippi, and then, you know, the story about his parents and living after like the Second World War in Germany, and I think also like engaging the audience, like who else here, like I think that was also engaging. You just feel like it's a real person and it's a real story that you can relate to in different ways, I guess. Like even if you don't have the same kind of story, you have also a family or a moment that made you, you know, realize something, and I think that was powerful.
Any other thoughts?
I was just going to add, I think emphasizing choice, kind of building on what Aitana was saying, is like that I think that this is also something I've learned from doing work against sexual violence and partner violence, that like lots of people live in realities where they have very few choices and very limited agency. But actually part of our process of liberation is finding the places where we do have choices and supporting people in taking choices that are in alignment with their values. So yeah, I appreciate emphasizing that in a way that's also realistic, that like it's not like all of us have a buffet of options, but that is kind of the source of our liberation, is when we get intentional about what we choose to do.
I think that's really, oh, sorry, Jess, go on.
No, you go.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I think that's really powerful points from both of you. And I think one of the other things I notice in the way this, and I think is an interesting kind of point just about creating, to help you create your own narrative, that I see from Marshall's video. Firstly, I found Marshall's video incredibly intimidating because I was like, wow, amazing, unbelievable, Mississippi civil rights, like, whoa, I haven't done that stuff. But actually, like you said, it kind of helps. What's really wonderful about it is that that story of self, everyone has something that led them there. And it's a case of trying to work that out and find that out, A. And the second thing I think is really interesting, just from a structure perspective, is that it's cyclical. Like, it's not just like when we did it in class, we wrote it, story of self, story of us, story of now. That's kind of just to help us get something done, to get it graded. But actually what I found really powerful in Marshall's was one, and the ones that others have done, is that you can mix it up. It helps to start with a story of self, because it's you and it helps you connect to the audience. But you can mix it up. He mixed it up. The us was in there. He talks about children of like preachers. He talks about the Holocaust. He talks about, you know, and he's really swinging between these different areas. So it's fascinating how he does that. And I think we can all really learn something from that.
Just the final thought from me, and then gonna hopefully in the last 10 minutes dive in a little bit more into what this means for you guys. So just thinking about, you know, most of the kind of big movements that are the kind of most exciting movements that are being built at the minute. Clearly a big part of that is how you bring new people into activism who previously, had no interest in politics, or it was just irrelevant to them, or whatever, they assumed that change was a thing that other people did. And I think there's something really great again about this way of thinking of painting your own story, so that when people hear you speak, there is something in there that they can latch onto that feels inherently personal, in the way that, as Amna said, I'm always tempted to kind of go, look, here's the statistics, here's how many people that are bothered and are impacted by X problem. And while that might intellectually make you go, oh, okay, that's an issue, I just think there is something so deeply human about appealing to people's heart. So when I kind of come back to this, I'm always tempted to go to that, the kind of detail and the evidence. And I often have to keep bringing myself back to, yeah, but why did you feel that this was something that you should care about? What was it that really got you there? So again, I think that's just something for us to kind of think about as we get into this. So we only have about 9 minutes left, but wanted to give you guys maybe just 2 or 3 minutes, and we'll maybe just mute ourselves. And without wanting to put too much pressure on, because as Amna said, this often does take a full semester, if you can maybe just think of 2 or 3 bullets of what it is about your story that you could bring to the table to make other people care about the issues that you guys are working on. So we will, we'll give you kind of 2 or 3 minutes. We'll maybe go around and just ask you to offer those to the group. We won't have time to kind of build on them, but as Amna said, we can give you resources, and happy to take this forward and build those out with you. So we'll go silent and give you a couple of minutes to do that. Sorry, I should have said, Jeff, Melanie, we'll maybe ask you to turn the recording off when we come back together, just so people feel able to share, as much as they're able to. That we ran through briefly, that has some links there around the framework more broadly, more examples, tools for developing this further. Again, I'm happy to work with you guys more if you want to, think through this, want a thought partner, want to check things around. But at least from my perspective, I hope that was a useful kind of overview, and just gives you a sense of your own personal narrative and how that can really bring others to the causes that you care about. Amna, is there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap it up?
Just thank you for your attention and your time, which is very precious, and I appreciate you guys trying to think of new and different ways, and seeking out the kind of best frameworks for this work, because it's so incredibly important. And I hope that this training was useful to you as a starting point. I have just logistically, I have shared in the chat the shareable Google Docs link to the presentation, and I would urge you to have a look at the very last slide, which is further resources, because one of those resources in particular from the Leading Change Network, which is Marshall Ganz's organization, Jess and I were looking at yesterday, and we think it could be really valuable to you and provide a kind of offline course for other organizers.
Yeah, and just finally, all the power to you guys for what you're trying to do and change, and we'll be thinking of you over the next couple of weeks and months as your work continues.
Can I ask a question really quickly?
Yeah.
Is it okay if we share the link with other people, or
yeah,
do the presentation?
Jess, what do you think?
Fine by me.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
If anybody wants to share appreciations really quick for our facilitators, go for it, just jump in.
Yeah, thank you so much for this. It was really helpful, and it made me think about a lot of things, so thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for donating your time, volunteering. I have a question. Amna, you said that this type of framework would be like take a semester to teach or like to understand. How would that look like, and like where could we find resources like that would take something?
Of course. It took me a semester to learn, but it might take you much less time. So the Leading Change Network resources that I mentioned it's on the further resources page of the doc I've shared with you in the chat. Have a look at that. Click to it. Have a look at the top link. Leading Change Network. There is actually a free, available to all. I don't think you even have to log in. You just click on it, and if you have the ability to download it, and there's a course kind of available to you. So I think the only difference I would say, Aitana, between taking that course and what I did is that we had a lot of class time to develop us now, link it all together and coach each other. So I think if you guys all have an interest in this, I would recommend that you find a time to come together and try and coach each other as well. I think it's very important to share it, because what you think in your head versus what you say and what is powerful can be different. I hope that helps.
No, that does. Thank you so much.
Cool. And guys, if you have any other questions, Melanie's got our email addresses, so happy for you to at least reach out to me. So yeah.
Thanks so much. We really appreciate your time and your energy, and yeah, we'll all be in touch, so I'll follow up.
Brilliant.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Bye now.